Hey, friends, how are you? Welcome. Thanks for hanging out. I have a question for you. What if the very thing that you have been resisting is the key to your freedom? So, what if letting go isn't giving up, but finally stepping into peace? So, today we're talking about something that's hard, something that's raw, and something that is also necessary. It's called acceptance. And let me tell you something, the cost of non acceptance is higher than you might think. So, we're going to dive into this. And this is not the, oh, well, I guess it's just the way it is kind of acceptance, but the kind of acceptance that we hear about in recovery, the kind that brings peace. And I know this firsthand as a recovering alcoholic, codependent, losing my brother to alcohol addiction and all the difficulties of the grief, the codependent family dynamics that come along with these types of ongoing situations. And yes, they are ongoing for many of us, which is why acceptance is so important. So acceptance is not about weakness, but it is about strength. So let's start. We're going to cover acceptance in recovery, acceptance in trauma, acceptance in things we can't change, acceptance as it pertains to forgiveness, and the cost of non-acceptance, looking at this through a biblical lens. And watch until the end, because this episode just might catapult your recovery or mental health journey and change your life. And there are tons of recovery and mental health information and podcasts on this channel. So please hit the subscribe button if you're watching this on YouTube. I would love that. So acceptance in addiction and recovery. So let's start with the obvious. Addiction acceptance is the foundation of recovery. It is step one of the 12 steps. Admitted we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. So no one recovers without admitting that they have a problem. I didn't. Denial keeps us stuck. Acceptance will move us forward. And I just want to say briefly that denial is not always a bad thing. We say, oh, they're in denial, but you know what? That's not always bad. If you were young, there was trauma, abuse in your past, a lot of times denial can save you, right? It can help you deal with the family dynamics. That's why people that sometimes have extreme abuse, they disassociate, things like that happen. We're created that way. We tend to blame ourselves for these things rather than thinking our caregiver would harm us like that. And so those types of denial can save us in a dysfunctional environment. But then when we get older, we have to step out of that denial and face these things. Otherwise, they backfire in the real world. Not that our family dynamic wasn't the real world, but I think you understand what I mean. So, for years, I tried to quit drinking, but I couldn't. Then I tried the me and God routine, like, hey, God, you fix it. When I finally accepted my reality, I knew if I continued in my addiction, I would die young. I'd already gotten arrested for drunk driving. Luckily, I didn't harm anyone or, God forbid, kill anyone. But something like that would have happened to me. And so I finally summoned the courage to ask for help. And it was hard. Let me tell you what, it was not easy. Asking for help was one of the hardest things that I ever had to do. And it's often like this if you struggle with addiction, because think about it. If you were raised and there was trauma and you didn't have anyone there to help you, and what happens is, right, if caregivers or people weren't there to help you, you kind of think, well, I have to do everything myself. Right. Our brains get wired for trauma or things like that. And so it's like, I got to take matters into my own hand. There's nobody there to help me. Right. Your theme song is, if you're my generation, is Whitesnake, here I go again on my own, or maybe, Green Day, I walk alone. But, that's just one reason why asking for help is so hard. I tried to handle my addiction on my own. I would bargain with God. I would make deals like, here's one. Okay, God, I'll get rid of all of my heavy metal CDs and cassettes. back in the day. If you will strike me sober. I was drunk again the next day, bargaining with God. That's a whole nother story, and we'll get into that. Friday at 3, tune in for that video, Bargaining with God. I'll tell you that story. It's actually pretty funny now, looking back. But it wasn't until I fully surrendered and reached out for help that I started to see change. So acceptance means stepping out of denial, right? Admitting our struggles, not just to God, but to others too. So, whether it's addiction, trauma, mental health struggles, we are not meant to do life alone. And if you're in a place where you feel like you can't ask for help, that it's too hard, I get it. But the freedom that comes from admitting our need is so much greater than the weight of pretending we have it all together. And acceptance is not admitting defeat, because it's really just accepting that there are things and people that are beyond our control and addictions that have become more powerful than we can manage on our own and in our own strength. And so the real strength is in letting go of that. Letting go of the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Acceptance takes more strength than just sitting in our doo-doo. Sorry if I'm distracted. I'm trying to monitor this live stream because I keep trying to set these up and everything's working, and then it's not live. If it's not live and you're watching it non-live, that's because the live thing didn't work. But yeah, so acceptance is, it takes more strength than we realize. Admitting defeat is sometimes when real recovery begins, right? And acceptance takes more strength, like I said, because if you don't accept these things, like if you don't accept your reality, whether it's addiction or trauma or something else, those things will control us. They'll keep us trapped. And when I say acceptance, that doesn't mean admitting that it was right or something like that. It's just understanding that this is what happened. It wasn't okay. One of my favorite quotes is really simple. I think it was Dr. Henry Cloud. Reality is always your friend. Everything else is just fantasy, right? So looking at our life and saying, what is reality? And if we can do that, this requires inner reflection, taking inventory of our stuff. And anybody, I think, can recover if they can do that from addiction, from narcissism, from codependency. It's this self-reflection. We all know people that are unable to do that. And when we can't do that, life can be very hard and our relationships can be very hard. So I want to read you something awesome from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, page 417. This is quoted a lot. It is my absolute favorite. When I stopped living in the problem and began living in the answer, the problem went away. From that moment on, I've not had a single compulsion to drink or use or whatever it is. And here it is. And acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. When I am disturbed, it is because I find some person, place, thing, some situation, some fact of my life unacceptable to me. And I can find no peace, no serenity until I accept that person, place, thing, or situation is being exactly the way it is supposed to be at this moment. Nothing, absolutely nothing happens in God's world by mistake. Until I could accept my alcoholism, my addiction, I could not stay happy, right? Unless I accepted life on life's terms, I could not be happy. I'm paraphrasing this. I needed to concentrate not so much on what needs to be changed in the world as what needs to be changed in me and my attitudes. So that's powerful. Look that up. What it's really saying is, can't change anybody else, but I can change me, right? There's another section that's like, all the world was a stage and I was its greatest director. Right? If only everyone would play their part, life would be fine. But bitterness, non-acceptance, all these things come when people don't play their part and we don't accept it. So let's look at acceptance and trauma. Many of us have been through, we're all like waking up brings trauma. You wake up, you turn on the news, you're traumatized. Childhood wounds, betrayal, loss. Accepting trauma, again, it's not saying that it was okay. It's accepting what happened, processing it, doing what we need to do to get through it. Yes, forgiveness. We'll touch on that so we can heal. Because if we're stuffing it or we're trying to drink it away, it's not going to work because it doesn't go away. It's never going to go away, but we can make peace with it. Okay. So again, not approval, right? If we accept something painful, we're not saying it was okay. It's acknowledging this happened. It hurt. It wasn't my fault, right? But I'm not going to let it define my future. So it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. Okay. So if I could go back and change things in my life, I would, but I can't. And neither can you. But it is our responsibility. When we were young, whatever happened, that was not our fault. Now, when you react to trauma from addiction, abuse, it's a normal reaction to trauma. Your brain's wired for trauma. You're not getting the dopamine. You're not getting what you need. You take a drink, suddenly you get it. It's like a big hug. I get it. So you have to work on acceptance, huge, retraining your brain, recovery, all this stuff. And this is where God comes in. And if you're not a Christian or you don't believe in God, that's okay. There's a lot of stuff to learn through this, but Jesus Christ saved me from myself in more ways than one. And I know that he can save you too, but we need to pray about what do we accept? How do we do it? Because a lot of times we actually don't know. I had to accept the alcohol addiction in my family, my brother's death from alcoholism, my addiction, grieving that, accept that I'm dyslexic, that when I was a kid, I struggled, that I was told I was stupid by some teachers, that it left me with a massive wound, massive self-esteem, massive codependency. And that's a whole nother, I have some videos on that. Can you be an alcoholic and be codependent? Yeah, most of us are. Once I got sober, I was like, oh wow, I'm like really codependent, and so the real work began when I got sober and accepted all these things going on in my personality and how I had all these relational imbalances. Okay. We won't get into relational imbalances, but you probably kind of get the idea. And I do have a playlist on codependency that talks about, relational imbalances and stuff. So acceptance in trauma and addiction and from a biblical perspective is really trusting in God's bigger plan. The Bible doesn't sugarcoat it. In this world, you will have trouble. You will, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Cast all your cares on him, for he cares for you. God created the universe. We can't even figure out the universe right now. So think of it. And then he created us so that we would turn to him, that we would rely on him. So there are many things that we can manage ourselves. And basically, we take what we can't manage and what we don't understand, and we give it to God, right? Cast all your cares on him. He cares for you. Do not be anxious for anything, but in everything through prayer and supplication, make your requests known to God, and the peace of God will surpass all understanding. I'm kind of paraphrasing, mixing and meshing scriptures, but trusting in God's plan is like, God, I don't understand this. Okay, but I trust you. Life is a mystery, and sometimes it's a fun mystery and sometimes it's not, but the real catalyst is when it comes to acceptance is forgiveness. And forgiveness is very tough. Like you needed me to tell you that, because without it, it gives way to resentment and bitterness. And those are the things that can destroy us, unlike being a coffee addict. So this one's tough because holding on to resentment can feel like we're protecting ourselves. But in reality, it keeps us trapped because the person that harmed you, chances are they're not trapped. Chances are they don't even care. And in recovery groups is often said that resentment is the number one killer. And really what that means is really the number one cause of relapse, because it just starts to poison us from the inside out. Okay. I mean, you could see why. I mean, anger, negative effect, as they say, is the number one cause of relapse. So negative emotions. And that doesn't mean that negative emotions are bad. Emotions are just warning signs. What happens when we let them control us and we don't process them and deal with them, then they can control us. I mean, I had so much anger. I had anger and rage episodes and road rage episodes and throwing things and breaking things. And I can't tell you all the stuff that I had to work through. And it was hard. Letting go of anger wasn't easy. It took a lot of work. It's not just like, oh la la, And I wanted to stay bitter for a lot of reasons. I felt justified. But at some point, ask yourself, do you need to be right? Or do you want to be free? Sometimes we have to give up our right to be right so we can get through something. Bitterness is dangerous. It does everything bad. Messes up your immune system, blood pressure, affects sleep, accelerates aging. I mean, that's what they say. Just saying. But what is the opposite of all of that? See, acceptance, the huge cause, or resentment, a huge cause of relapse. So what is the opposite of all of that? Acceptance. And so acceptance and forgiveness are very much friends, cousins, sisters, brothers. The difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. So let's talk about that. How to forgive is a whole nother thing. And I have a really long episode on that, on how actually do you do it. But forgiveness, okay, it's not excusing it. It's about refusing to let it control your life. It's a process. It's a daily choice. So we say, God, I forgive. Help me to forgive. With every step toward forgiveness, we can open our hearts to peace and healing. I will say this, that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing at all. You can forgive the, let's say, alcoholic in your life without enabling them. You can love people without having a relationship with them if the relationship is too destructive. It's just like people that forgive, say, the drunk driver, right, that killed their daughter or something. They often, you'll hear, I forgive you. Does that mean that they go visit the guy in jail or become his pet? No, not at all. So keep that in mind, because that's really important. Because a lot of times with addiction and codependency and stuff, we think, if I forgive them, then I have to accept everything. Well, yeah, we have to accept what they did, but that I have to be their friend. And that's not true. Okay. Living with things we can't change. We touched on this a little bit. There are so many things I wish I could undo, right? Losses, betrayals, painful seasons, losing family members to addiction. I struggled with this question, God, why did you let this happen? And I don't know the answers. None of us do. What I do know is that, again, acceptance doesn't mean approval. It just means we stop fighting, right? The Serenity Prayer is all about this. It's the most beautiful prayer ever. I have lots of videos on Serenity too. plug. But seriously, check all this stuff out. I put a lot of work into it, and there's a lot of great stuff for you. But the Serenity Prayer, many don't truly grasp what this prayer means. So I'm just going to do the short version. God, grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, the courage to change what I can, the wisdom to know the difference. So acceptance, right? Let's break it down. Recognizing that past trauma, betrayal, actions of others beyond our control. Courage involves taking responsibility for our responses, how we react. We can seek help, choose to make amends, take steps to improve ourself, our well-being. Okay. But the wisdom to know the difference, that is the tricky part, distinguishing between what we can and cannot change. That's a tough one because if I'm obsessing over something, I'm still trying to change it in my mind. I may not be outwardly trying to control it, but I'm just obsessed. Bob doesn't like me. You know, my boss hates me. What? And then I could get drunk over that. What's the courage to change what I can? Maybe I go talk to my boss, right? So we like to obsess over what we can't change, right? That's where the resentment comes in because we're afraid to change what we can. So, we dwell on things we can't fix. We rehash the past, reliving conversations over and over again. Oh, I should have done that. Holding on to resentment. I wish this live feed would have worked. Keep trying, it's not working. I once heard God tell me, not in an audible voice, but you spend so much time trying to change what you can't. You miss the opportunity to change what you can, right? Obsessing over job rejection, it might keep us from applying to a new one. Trying to fix an addict in our life could blind us from work that we need to do on ourselves. So acceptance brings peace, regardless of the circumstances. I've struggled with feeling like a late bloomer. My addiction held me back. Low self-esteem, again, dyslexia, fear, anxiety, panic attacks. I had it all. And I sometimes, felt like I should have been where I am now when I was 30, like feeling like a late bloomer. I can't change that. Resisting acceptance only leads to anger, resentment, self-pity, again, which can destroy us. And a powerful biblical example is Job, everybody's favorite book of the Bible. It's so inspirational. It is at the very end. Ecclesiastes is about is maybe more inspirational, maybe not. He lost everything, his family, his wealth, his health, yet he responded by worshiping God and saying, the Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. Despite his suffering, he trusted God's wisdom, and in the end, he was restored and blessed more than ever before. So this is like the dark night of the soul. Maybe you read about walking through the valley of the shadow of death. This is really difficult. A lot of times, especially as Christians, we will have these ridiculously painful seasons that are just beyond what we ever thought we could have. And it's part of the pruning, it's part of the growth, and it helps us literally at the end say, you know what? I don't need anyone but you, God. Right? It's a stripping away of all that stuff that defined us. And I've been through that. And I was ready to be done with God completely. I'm like, I'm out. Spent the day listening to heavy metal. And, I'm like, I'm done. I'm done with you, God. And I was miserable, like even more miserable. So that lasted about a day, And I had a therapist say, why would you let anyone steal your relationship with God? Just that. Like, how many words is that? 8 to 10 words. It was life-changing. I was like, oh, yeah. And this is one of those codependent things, like thinking that they had to destroy that for me, that I didn't have a choice. I have a choice. A lot of people that struggle with addiction and codependency, we actually don't feel like we have a choice. And so sometimes even just having like a good therapist, show us like you have a choice. Doing what you're going to do, how they respond, that's not your problem. She kept saying, how they respond is not your problem. I'm like, oh my gosh. And it's true. It's true. And so, that mindset, man, like I was on the floor in a fetal position. And when I came out of that, it was like, you know what, God, if you never do another thing for me ever again, we're good. I'm with you. I am with you. Yeah. So let's talk about the cost of non-acceptance. Okay, so flipping the script. What happens when we don't accept reality, right? We become bitter, resentful, trapped in unforgiveness. Think about it. If you're holding on to a grudge, who's really suffering, right? The person who hurt you or you? Holding on to resentment is like drinking poison. I love this kind of poison. And then expecting the other person to die, right? And I heard a pastor say this one time, um, and it was really, really cool. He said, when we don't forgive, we're basically saying, you owe me. We're telling that other person, you owe me. And then he said, what if they tried to make it right? Is there anything they could ever do to make up for it? Probably not. Maybe, but probably not. So that's why forgiveness is so huge. And again, the person you have that resentment against, they're probably like, la-di-da. If you told them what they did, they'd be like, no, I didn't. And so we run around wanting closure, and most of the time it just doesn't happen. Most people don't ever admit they did anything wrong, right? So finally, how do we cultivate this acceptance? What do we do? Getting help is huge. Getting a sponsor if you're in recovery, doing the self-inventory is enormous. All of that stuff can be found in recovery groups. Al-Anon is incredible. Alcoholics Anonymous, Celebrate Recovery, the church has great programs too. And then just having someone to walk alongside you, getting a great therapist, mindfulness and meditation. I know that sounds all, new agey, but the Bible talks about meditation, meditating on God's word, which is enormous, right? Of course, because the Bible is like full of cognitive behavioral therapy, transform the way you think and you'll transform your mind, and then you will know God's pleasing and perfect will for you, things like that it talks about. And so those types of things are huge, to do. But being mindful is really just, what am I feeling and why? Why am I angry now? How can I react differently? Because once you know things, right, that's what stepping out of denial, acceptance is. I see what's happening. What shall I do about it? You can't fight against something you don't see. And the enemy wants to keep you trapped and alone inside of yourself so that you won't ask for help. Because when we're alone, that's when he comes to steal, kill, and destroy and keep you isolated and tell you that no one cares and nobody wants you. And that's not true. So yeah, and support groups, self-compassion, stop beating yourself up. None of us are perfect. So there are many things that you can do. And if you've gone through this before, let me know in the comment section and things that you've done. One other thing I forgot is writing it out. So right, there's journaling, but then there's also, like, let's say you put in the left-hand column things I can change versus things I can't. It'll give you some more clarity. And the things you can't change, you give to God. The things you can, you pray for the courage to act on those things. Does that make sense? So acceptance, friends, trust that it's not the end. It is the beginning. And so I want to challenge you with 3 questions. What is one thing you need to ask for help with? Who is someone you need to forgive? And what's something you need to stop fighting and start trusting God with? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this resonated with you, follow this page, like, subscribe if you're on YouTube, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't miss the Friday video at 3:00 Pacific, Addiction and Bargaining with God. Thanks for watching, friends. God bless you.